Chris Ortiz. I'm so happy to be talking with you. Our topic today is team dynamics, and I've been wanting to talk with you about this in a recorded way for a while now. And recently, I had the opportunity to attend a workshop that you did at ACT International on the topic of team dynamics. And I feel like there's relevancy to all audiences of this podcast from the participant perspective, from the educator perspective, from the facilitator perspective. And so my goal is to really have you define a model that I know that you've developed some expertise, and then for me to get a little bit more context on how that is valuable for different audiences. So can you share your role now and how team dynamics are an important role of that in terms of how you teach others?
Yeah. I mean, I'm wearing multiple hats at the moment,
It's
but
actually not hats, but keep going.
what's that?
You're not actually wearing any hats, but yes.
No, this is true. None are on my head at the moment, but I would say that so team dynamics, group dynamics is sort of a part of every part of my work. And so let me just the couple of hats and sort of how they all fit, I guess maybe. Oh, that was a weird pun. Like, yeah. So I'm an instructor at Penn State University in the Recreation Parks and Tourism Management department. And I teach a class called Leadership and Group Dynamics. So there's a direct connection there as this is content area that I'm teaching the students as they begin their journey into recreation professions. Some of those might be team development facilitators, commercial recreation, professional golf management majors, lots of variety, outdoor educators of all varieties. So lots of variety of where they're going, and the content of group dynamics sort of universally applicable there for sure. The other part of my work here at Penn State is running Team Development Center. And our team development programming, we are working with clients to better their culture and their team dynamics. And this idea of group dynamics is running through my head in a couple of layers. And it's also something that I talk to them about so that they have some context and some opportunities for learning and development themselves. And then currently I'm sitting as the interim director of Shavers Creek itself. And so anytime you're in a supervisory role or you're running a team or a group of people, if you're not paying attention to the group dynamics, that is that is something that you need to be paying attention to in a variety of ways. So anyway, it hit. I have all these hats, and I can honestly say that I have this idea of group dynamics kind of running through my head all the time, and it doesn't matter what the audience is. It's part of that facilitator, part of that leader, part of that um, cultivator of an experience.
That's
Yeah.
great. And I would add another hat, which is we are so grateful that you serve on the board of directors at High Five and are
Yes.
a High Five staff alum. And we just
Yes.
really missed each other in our experience here. Chris, is team dynamics and group dynamics a synonym? Is it the same thing? Do you use those interchangeably?
I think I do. Yeah. I think I do. Because I think the word group, I think just gives a broader context, and team sort of lends itself to that intact group of people. But I think the idea or the theories that I look at and sort of play around with apply in both settings. And that fact that one of the groups is an intact team doesn't necessarily, that just is a factor within the equation, so to speak.
Gotcha. And as soon as when we think about either, and I understand the difference of sort of how we apply the term group versus team, as soon as two people are in conversation with each other, is that a group?
Yeah, when I talk to my students about this is a really great discussion point. And actually, ironically, that's the lesson we're teaching today in my class here in a couple hours. Um, we often talk about how many people need to change in a setting for you to behave differently. We behave in a certain way by ourselves. If I'm alone, I might behave in a certain way. How many more people need to be added before my behavior might change? And so the argument, I think, just one. If I'm by myself versus if I'm with another individual, my behavior might change. Another way to look at this was I would talk to my students like, if you were to go out to dinner with your roommates, how might you behave? Now, if we change your roommate out and we put in one of your parents, does your behavior change? If we remove your parent and we put in a professor or a grandparent, or like anytime you change that one individual, is that enough for us to potentially change the way we're behaving or interacting or engaging in that particular situation? So I'd argue most of the time that's true. I mean, there's definitely people who we are more comfortable with and we are ourselves, and we don't feel like that person necessarily changes the way we behave. Although I might argue it does, and it definitely impacts the group around us. So
Yep.
anyway,
Yeah.
yeah.
And for some reason, the idea of like we both just went to a conference and we weren't together on the plane, but like even just my sitting down in a seat on a plane and a group of strangers, there's some dynamics. So you mentioned environment and who we're with. So this, I want to start with asking you to present this formula that you presented at the workshop and get into that a little bit. And then I want to ask you some questions about that from different perspectives. So this is about sort of behavior is what?
Yeah, so this is Kurt Lewin's formula from, I think I was just doing a little background research on it in this morning. Back in the 30s, I think is the first time that he wrote this as a way of combining some fields of psychology from child psychology, animal psychology, and so on, and unifying those sort of behind some theory and his field theory. I grabbed a whiteboard so I could draw it. So the theory here, the equation that is our behavior is a function of who we are as a person in the environment we've been placed in. So this is the equation. Another way he's written this is our behavior is a function of the situation, the entirety of the situation. So how do we look at the entirety of that situation? So not just who we are as an individual and the environment, but the whole situation. And that's sort of what that equation relates to. So this is the equation I've been playing around with. Kurt Lewin wrote it in 1936 originally, but for me, when I sort of discovered this, and again, I'm discovering it, meaning I read it about it and started looking at it. It's like, wow, this just sort of summarizes everything about facilitation, leadership. There's just something in there about all of it. And so, yeah, so that's the equation. So I can break it down just a little bit further. So, sort of like we have sort of, if we are facilitating a group of people, looking at from a facilitator lens, we're facilitating a group of people, have a hoped outcome or behavior of the group. Maybe it's a learning outcome. It's a way we hope they will engage with one another and with the material that we're presenting or the elements that we're facilitating, whatever it might be. So that behavior outcome is a function of that individual and the environment we place them in. And the environment is that situation, that whole arena, and their background experience, biases, all the different things that make up us as individuals interacting with an environment that's been cultivated or created by our facilitator, our leader, our choices, whatever. All of that is in there. And so it's sort of this wonderfully all-encompassing thing. So anything I start thinking about, like, yep, that's in there. It's in the equation. It's like, the sequence that we've chosen of activities when we're facilitating. It's in there. The way we set up the room, it's in there because that's all part of the environment. The way I show up, the emotional intelligence, which you led a wonderful workshop on as well. Even that emotional intelligence, the way we regulate ourselves in our own environment and what we bring into the room, we are a part of each other's environment. And so that affects the behavior of others. So yeah, it's all encompassing. You mentioned a plane. Who sits next to you on the plane? That's another individual. The plane hasn't changed. The seating hasn't changed. That your knees bumping into the seat in front of you hasn't changed. But that one individual sitting next to you or a different individual sitting next to you might change your behavior. Do I choose to take my headphones out and talk? Do I keep them in and watch my video? Whatever it might be.
So behavior being a function of who we are as people plus environment. And I love the use of the word like levers, like that we can consider like if one like there really is so much empowerment in thinking about how we can raise up a component and then maybe try to minimize another component. How does that change depending, let's stay at the facilitator cut. How does that change depending on what the participants are expected to do together? For example, maybe contrast you're doing a challenge course experience versus you're giving a lecture in a lecture hall where students are not expected to learn from each other. Like, how does that concept differ for you and how you think about it? How does the expectation of participant engagement impact how we look at this equation?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, so the expectations that we set for a group or that they come into is part of the the person, and how we frame things, how we, the materials we sent out in advance, the expectations that they have when they walk in the room. So you talked about a lecture style of presentation. People are going to walk into that room with a certain set of expectations or thoughts. Like somebody might come in and say like, well, it's going to be a lecture. I can sort of get my laptop out, do a little email, sort of not pay attention fully. I could kind of engage with something. And then if all of a sudden I shift that dynamic and in the environment that I'm creating, saying, you know what, I really want engagement. I want people to be talking to one another. I want to create something different. That's going to shift that person's behavior, their experience, because I've now modified the environment that they were expecting. And those two things aren't connecting. Yeah, we have, we have part of that P, that us that we bring to a particular group or a team dynamic, a particular situation. Um, that expectation is big because we do all that framing and setup before they've even stepped on site. I talk about it from a context of marketing and getting good material out so that people know what to expect, what footwear to wear, how to dress, how they're going to be expected to engage. Because if I don't set that stage and then they show up with a certain expectation and then I flip the script on them, their behavior might not be what I would hope for. They might withdraw, they might check out, they might sort of say, you know what, actually, I do have a phone call I need to take. And then they might leave the room, because I'm not creating an environment that was met their expectations in that setting. So there's a little bit of element of that. I'm not sure if that's where you're.
No, it's interesting because you've used the word expectation a few times already in this conversation. And I'm looking at my notes and I'm thinking, where does the concept of setting expectations fit in this context? And you're right. Like, if I'm a participant, my behavior will change if you change what's expected of me in terms of my engagement. And I think for me, it's probably an underappreciated component of group dynamics. Like, hey, let's go outside for a minute, right? I don't sort of think about how the expectation of the setting will then feed into the change of the environment. The model is very clear to me, and I think the way you presented it will be very clear to our listeners. We've talked about this from the facilitator perspective. Let's talk about from the participant perspective, right? So maybe it's a participant who's coming to do a one-day workshop at Shavers Creek in whatever setting. How does understanding that my behavior is a function of who I am as a person plus environment help me show up in the most productive way in a new group?
Well, yeah. So now stages of group development fit nicely within this as well. Because if we're looking at that whole situation and that behavior, expectations of, I used it again, the expectations of sort of what we're going to engage in. If I'm going with an intact group of people, I have some social glue, some social connection with those people. And so my behavior will be a certain way versus going into a group of unknown folks who are formed for the day for a learning experience, like a workshop group, whether it be High Five, Shavers Creek, or wherever. The stages of our development as a group, if we are just in that forming stage, we tend to be nice to one another. We tend to not want to get on each other's nerves and fully present ourselves. But if we have more comfort with one another, we are past that forming phase and we might be either in storming or norming or whatever it might be in that stages of group development. But our social connection with one another will change the way we show up in that setting. We often see groups who are brand new look like they're performing. They are just look very high functioning, but it's because they're being really nice with one another. They're putting their best foot forward to be perceived in a certain way and to show up for one another, and sort of like, these people don't know me. I want to do really great things. And so they bring sort of a good version of themselves. And then as time goes on, if you might work through and like, wow, that person actually, they're doing this thing that's really bothering me. I didn't say anything in the beginning, but now that I have spent 2-3 days with them, I feel like I need to address it because it's driving me crazy, and then now all of a sudden we're getting into this like willingness to engage, and it changes the group's behavior and the way we interact. And so that stages of group development is very much a part of that. And so for me as a participant going into a thing, if I'm going to a workshop and I think my theory here is that I kind of show up in a certain way that is, I want to put my best foot forward with a group of people I don't know. Whereas if I'm going to a workshop with a bunch of my friends or with my colleagues and we all signed up together, we might have a slightly different engagement and behavior. I think about first aid CPR training we just did out at Shavers Creek not too long ago. We all did it as a staff group. So we know each other. And so there's some joking around and some, and so the facilitator of that has to deal with us um, behaving in a certain way because we are a socially intact group. But if I went to do a first aid CPR training by myself with a group of people I didn't know, it might be a little bit more on my best behavior.
I think this gets into the question of like, what are the factors that determine who we are as a person? Now, that could be a whole different podcast, but what are the like, how as a facilitator do we need to understand, or as a participant, sort of what are like the core, like, I'm going to show up like this no matter what, if I'm on the plane, if I'm with a brand new group, if I'm with my family, versus the things that could be more chameleon like.
Yeah.
How does understanding that impact the way you think about group and team dynamics?
I think it's a lot of what you talked about in your workshop around emotional intelligence. So I might throw this to you in the end here, but it is the word dynamic may be the most important one in this whole equation or this whole conversation is that it is ever changing. And who I am today is not who I will be tomorrow. Because a whole 24 hours of life experiences will have happened to me. And those may be good, they may be bad. This morning, I was coming into work this morning. I made my chai at home, but I was like, I'm a little hungry. I'm running late. I'm going to go to the Dunkin' Donuts and I'm going to get a little avocado toast or something, just something to put something in my stomach for the day. I got in line. I went through the line and I got up to the window to pay. And the woman said, the car in front of you just paid for your toast. Wonderful little like gift of my morning. Right. But even that small thing impacts how I show up to this building. Maybe I'm a little lighter in my step, smile on my face a little bit more, a little happy, like, hey, a little something went my way this morning. The next morning, I'm going to the exact same place, going to work, going to do my same thing, same routine, and I run over the curb and get a flat tire, or whatever. It completely changes, and it can happen like that. So the dynamic part, I think, is really we can only control what we can control,
Right.
but that's where emotional intelligence comes in. It's sort of like how can I, as a facilitator, regulate who I am and how I'm showing up with the group, but then what is the group expectations and their prior experiences with the material that I'm going to present, what happened to them, what time of day. I mean, we talk about that with different audiences. When do you schedule your program? What time of day? Different audiences will probably prefer different times of day for different things.
It's so true. And what this makes me think about is hopefully this is a scenario that the listeners can relate to. I know you and I have both had the privilege of facilitating like 5-day workshops, let's say at High Five, where strangers come together. And then in 5 days, this magic things happens where they're friends for life and they're keeping in touch. And I'm always really cautious to say, like, this isn't about me and the powerful experience I provided. There's something about being able to come someplace as a stranger and almost like reset who you are without the like nobody, if I'm a stranger, nobody, oh, Lisa's always the one that talks first, or Lisa's afraid of heights, whatever. I can dry erase board. I'm a fresh identity, right? And that what you're saying reminds me of, but if I have two people that come from the same school and then everybody else is coming alone, that's going to have a significant impact on the group dynamic because I'm coming with somebody who has an expectation already of who I am as a person. Would you agree with
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. 100%.
And so what do we do with that knowledge then as facilitators, knowing that some people have prior expectations of each other and some people don't? Like, how is that a lever in our considerations for programming and design and so forth?
Oh, that's a good question. I think for me, there's an element of creating an environment that works that's as inclusive as possible and works for all audiences that show up, right? So there's certain things that are part of the equation that we know are tried and true that we do every time. Certain sequence of activities to build rapport and trust, because even though those two people know each other, the rest of the group does not, or the rest of the group doesn't know them. So we really need to build that social equity there and build that foundation where everybody is sort of getting on the same page, starting to learn, building that foundation of trust and understanding of one another. That's why there is some real beauty that happens in those 5-day workshops, because we are able to sort of truly model a progression, a sequence of events that allows them to connect and to bond. And we do that because we start with building that foundation and connection. And then we give them an opportunity to challenge themselves and challenge this group dynamics and group itself and see where those things are and develop and create some group norms and test those group norms and get to a point where I am willing to step up on top of a paper pole with my best friend or this person I met 4 days ago. But I have built the same level of understanding of support that I'm going to get from them and the expectation of what I'm going to give them when it's their turn. We've sort of built that throughout that experience. So in some ways, it doesn't change a lot, but it does factor into an awareness. That's maybe my other buzzword that I use all the time is as facilitators of experience, we have to constantly be aware, keep our head on a swivel and be paying attention and watching like, okay, these two are so close, these two best friends in the group, that is negatively impacting group's ability to get to know them and to connect with them. And so I might need to then create some conversation to open that up a little bit and to get people to recognize what they're doing. Do they not have an awareness of the impact they're having on the group? It's a great opportunity for learning.
Right. And thinking about this in that context of like some people know each other previously, some people don't, it makes me think about, I'm not suggesting this like that we put this in the formula, but the role of novelty in that environment, right? If it's something that is unfamiliar for everyone, that's a reset. That resets the formula versus if some people are familiar and other people aren't, that's another factor in this formula. Behavior is a function of who we are as people plus our environment. So when we can make it new for everybody, that's a really important lever, if you will, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you think about when you do a training on some organization's home course and they have new staff, but then they have the staff who've been there for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and in helping them learn to integrate the newer staff into the culture of the course and how it's run and that sort of thing. Like, I mean, that's a huge element.
Totally. You and I were both in the room in a workshop last week where the adage that, is not new, which is like read the room, read the group, right? I think we have an opportunity in this conversation to make that a concrete skill that we can build upon, right? Because I've heard that term for 30 years, but I can't think of a time that I've been specifically and concretely taught not only here's how you do that, but almost as importantly, here's what you do with that information. Yep, that concept, I want to start by asking you, what are some misconceptions or maybe some errors or like ways that you've changed your thinking about team and group dynamics now based on your experience that you didn't have before? Or what are some errors in thinking that practitioners often make when it comes to team and group dynamics?
With relationship to reading the room or just in general?
I think either take will be helpful.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think the big word, again, this has sort of been a buzzword around my life, I think, for the last period of times is assumptions. So some of us feel like we are good at reading other people, and sometimes we're just not good at it. And even though we think we are, oh, I know what that means. And that person who is looking out the window and seemingly disengaged, like, oh, they're uninterested, they're bored, they're whatever. And really they're just thinking really hard about the thing that you said, and it actually is super impactful into them. And so we make a lot of assumptions about things that we see without creating opportunities for context. So I think that that's another tool that we have is reflection. And so giving people an opportunity to, if even in a lecture style of presentation, giving the group an opportunity to talk and reflect and share how this is landing for them gives you a bit of a verbal read of the room as well. It's like, so I'm not just assuming, oh, they're all checked out, they aren't paying attention, or they're bored with what I'm saying. It's like, no, I actually have got them thinking. And some of then I can start to hear the verbal feedback of like, oh yeah, okay, no, that's landing, that's making sense for them. So I think that process of reflection built into any experience is a really valuable piece for feedback, for the facilitator making adjustments and reading the room, so to speak.
So what you're saying makes me think about how important it is to, as a facilitator, if I think I'm reading something in the group, to not just say, okay, I'm reading that, it's right, and then keep going down that road, but to say, let me just check that out. Let me challenge my thinking a little bit to make sure that that's accurate. And providing opportunities for reflection is a great strategy for that,
What one of the things
is that we can experiment with that assessment of like, okay, am I seeing this right? And if we go back to the formula, it would seem like changing the environment is another way,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, I mean, and so to give you an example of this, you made me think of this right away. There's a reason why I choose, and this became up as like, oh, we should just do a workshop solely on these indicator activities. So we sort of joke.
Oh, tell me.
Indicator activities are activities that I choose to put into the front part of my program because they show me group dynamics that I can then further develop. Like I can watch the group engage and interact in the problem solving experience, and their behaviors are good indicators of me of where we want to go next and what. So for example, like when you're setting up a program and you're doing a program assessment, rarely are you talking directly with the participants during that program assessment. You're usually talking to a supervisor, a boss, a teacher, whoever that might be, who's in charge of this group of people. And they're going to give you their take on all of their people and the dynamics that are going on and the things that they need to work on. And then the group shows up and you start doing some stuff and you're like, I don't see that. Like, this is what I actually see. Like, as I watch the group, but I find those things by doing certain activities in the beginning of the program that kind of show me how the group is going to engage and interact with one another. Usually I'm picking an activity where I can step back and just watch a lot. I'm not needed as a facilitator firsthand to do the work or be a referee, so to speak. I'm actually just watching the group do that. Some things are as easy as I remember in leading 5-day trainings and those sorts of things. If we're doing we've got props all over on the ground. And I say, all right, well, I got to clean these up and we're going to move on to the next thing. Does the group get down on the ground with me and help clean up? Or do they watch me do it? Like, that's an indicator of sort of where we're going and what we're working with. It's a small thing, but it is a thing that I pay attention to in a small way of seeing, like, oh, okay, this group all got down on the ground and helped me clean up all the cards that we were working with. This tells me something about how our week is progressing and where we can go. It's a small thing, but it's a thing.
It is a small thing and it is an important thing. And I think especially in sort of the more beginner phases of teaching facilitation, I think we emphasize so much creating connections and bonds with our participants that we maybe miss the opportunity to emphasize that concept of indicator. I think that's a great term, and I'll continue to play with that concept. And maybe this came up in your workshop, I don't remember, but if our behavior is a function of who we are as a person plus environment, this helps explain this thing that we both see where we'll get a heads up from a teacher. You're going to have trouble with this kid. And then the kid comes and we're like, we didn't see it at all. Partly it could be not just because the teacher may have sort of a bias and is trying to protect us from having to discover something, but it could very well be, well, they're in a completely different environment. So they're showing up as a different person.
Absolutely.
A few minutes ago, I asked you a two-part question. Now I can't remember the second part of it. How do we take it? Like, that is a fact. I fully believe that. How do we then take advantage of that to make
Hmm.
our programs the most efficient and productive that they can be? That's a really hard question. I would understand if we need to make that more specific.
How do we take advantage of that perception versus reality?
Well, yeah, if we say like, oh, Lisa Hunt's coming, yeah, she's a talker, she's not going to be paying attention, she's, tends to swear, and you're like, all right, how do you design for people to show up at their best in the way that you want them to?
I think what I have learned to do is to check all of those assumptions at the door in some ways. When people tell me, I let that person reveal themselves to me. So to I think, there's a certain level of awareness, right? So I've worked with some groups that have students with various behavior issues that are systemic and like just part of their DNA and who they are. And we program for that. We make some accommodations, and we make sure that the environment that we are creating is conducive to their needs in that way. But if it comes down to like a social dynamic where like, oh, this person's always just talking all the time. It's like, well, I kind of want to see that show up in the room so that we can engage with that. If that's an actual, I'm envisioning an intact team that I'm doing team development, and I get warned by a supervisor that they've got somebody who just always takes over the programming. I got to invite that into the room if we're going to actually deal with it. If I program in a way to try to avoid that or not let it show up, then we're not actually dealing with it. We're not actually addressing that, which appears to be a problem for at least the supervisor, the person who's convened the group. So in some ways, I don't want to program or design that authentic behavior out of the group. Instead, it's inviting it in and then being able to then address and move forward with that,
Right.
and then dealing with it as we go.
Right. Right. Because it doesn't help the team if you're like, all right, you're going to be quiet for the whole session. Great. I accomplished a goal of like you not dominating, but then you haven't learned anything
Right.
about.
We haven't actually learned how to keep that person from dominating the group or let the other voices in. We haven't even given those other people the opportunity to voice their own free will and empower them to take control of the situation. We've controlled it for them, which is, if I am the team, if I got a group of people that I'm gathering together and I want to be an effective, efficient team, and I'm the leader of the team, I might need to be a little more autocratic in my leadership style, to borrow more Lewin philosophy stuff. But I might need to be a little more autocratic in my leadership style so that I can mitigate some of the behaviors that are holding us back. I might need to be assertive in that way. But if I'm really wanting this group to have long-term health and growth, it's best for me to facilitate conversations around understanding of behaviors and how they impact others. Show them this equation, you know, how you show up as a person is you're a part of everybody else's environment. So the way we interact and engage affects their behavior. How are we showing up in this space and how is it impacting others? Give them that equation and let them sort of see.
I love that idea of like just being really transparent about that instead of having it be this like facilitator secret theory that you have in your back pocket, because this concept applies to everybody in every situation that we're in. And I think the more I think about it and the more we're talking, Chris, I realize like this is a great gift. It makes me feel more powerful than powerless. Because if I feel like I don't like how I'm showing up, I could change my environment. Or maybe I could change my behavior and see if it changes how I feel about myself in
Absolutely.
ways, right? I remember the second part of my question, and then I think we should start to wrap up because I want to do a part two about indicator activities and then how you do that. I think we could get more into reading the group in that conversation, which is tell me just some um, ways that you have, if at all, stumbled as a facilitator in concept of group dynamics of maybe it's early in your career you used to approach it this way and now that's changed, or you thought you read something but it was wrong. Like I think we can all be inspired by stories of success. I think we could be even more inspired by experts like you showing how it's not as easy as it seems when we're talking about it.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that jumps to my mind right away is how earlier in my career, I was trying to define the behavior that I wanted. I was trying to craft, and so I'm trying to manipulate everything to get a certain behavior. And if you think about that from a high ropes course standpoint, it's like 100% participation from all of my folks on a particular element. That's the behavior I want. That's the outcome I want. That might not be what's the best area of opportunity for growth for one of the individuals in that group. Maybe them not participating is having the empowerment to have the voice to finally speak up and say, no, I'm not going to do this thing just because all of you are. And so have I crafted an experience an environment in which everybody feels safe to truly speak who they are and be authentic. I think I know this is sort of how I was trained early on, and sort of, it's about 100% participation, getting everybody in, getting everybody to do the things. That's how we know we succeeded. And it's like, well, yes, but how many times did I coerce somebody to do a thing that they didn't want to do because I didn't fully listen to what they were saying or pay attention to how they were showing up in this environment I had created. So I think there's an element of that is something that has shifted in my facilitation, is checking my own assumptions and sort of where we are going. It's not about how I want them to show up and to be. It's about sort of what is the most effective and efficient for this group of people as they are gathered. It takes a little bit more energy and effort and knowledge in a certain way, but I'm not trying to shape people into a mold that I've created. I'm letting the group sort of show me who they are and trying to help coach them now more towards more effectiveness in various ways. So I think that's definitely one of the things, maybe not a concrete example,
No,
but
eh, yeah, I mean, what I'm here, the way that my brain is interpreting this is about sort of what are our own criteria for a successful group experience, and having that change. It sounds like for you, it's more like looking at folks as having individual success, not by, again, expectation, not meeting some unspoken expectation that you have as a facilitator.
yeah, yeah. And obviously there are expectations. There are, I work a lot with sports teams. They need to be pushed to excel. So having a like, oh, whatever you want to do is like, no, you're a part of a team and you've got an objective. And how is what you're doing pushing yourself and pushing the group towards that end goal? That's important. That's an important conversation to have. And it can't just be you and like, no, you also have to live up to a standard of the team. Sure.
Right.
But but there is an element of that.
Yeah. As we begin to wrap up, and also hopefully you're willing to tease a second part of the conversation
Yeah.
about indicator activities, and what we do with that information, I think would be a really productive conversation. I want to offer this invitation to our listeners and then give you a chance to add your own perspective on this, which is, I found so much value, Chris, in your workshop where you asked us to, in small groups, brainstorm, like, okay, so one of the three aspects of the formula is person. Really think about, like, what does that mean? Like, what shapes who I am as a person? Is it where I am in my life? Is it what, my health? Is it my heritage? Like, all those different things. I think that's a really valuable thing for the listener to really think about, like, what are all those ingredients? And then the other list is, what are all the different ways that environments can change, and not just the weather and the seasonality, right? And not just the group setting, but like, for people to really parse this out in specific ways, because there isn't a right answer to all those ingredients, right? I think reflecting on those ourselves is going to be really important. Is there anything you would add to that, like, invitation for the listeners to grapple with these concepts?
I just thought of a metaphor because I like to cook.
Mhm.
Somebody once said that baking is a science and cooking is an art. And I think I really like that metaphor of like baking is a science. There's ratios, there's things that there is a formula. And when you follow that formula, you get a product. I think facilitation is more of that art. And we've talked about that, where there is no specific formula. It's about grabbing ingredients. It's about taking those pieces. And so for me, the biggest learning I've had in this area is to understand the menu and all the different things that are available to me. Understand what's in the spice rack and what is that going to do to a particular experience. And so if I'm noticing something about the group's behavior that seems off, it seems like that might be a part of how they're engaging with this environment, what are my tools or my things that I can modify or change? Taking the time to reflect about what are all the different individual things that that person might be bringing to the group, might have nothing to do with me and the environment that I've created. It's something that they are bringing with them because of what happened to them that morning, that week, that whatever.
Right.
But
Maybe
also,
they
so
got their
understanding,
avocado toast on their way
yeah,
this morning.
right.
Yep.
But it also could be, okay, this isn't working. Maybe sequence wise, I need to make some changes in my environment that I'm creating and see what that does. But it's a lot of testing. It's like, let me add this and then I got to taste it. I got to watch it. I got to see it and see if that's going to do anything. And oh, it did. Great. let's keep moving down that track. Or no, that didn't really have a good impact. Let's try this. What are my bag of tricks, ingredients of things that I might be able to modify or change?
I love that metaphor, Chris. It absolutely lands in terms of the seasoning in the spice rack, and the more we cook, not in the, like, teenage way of saying, like, "Let them cook," but, like, cook, the more we can sort of know what the impacts of those seasonings are.
Absolutely.
This is great. This is exactly the conversation I was hoping to have. Thank you, as always, Chris, for your expertise and wisdom. And in terms of environment, we have been left unchaperoned in this conversation, so I'm sure Phil will jump in and add his typical production and pieces, but I'm looking forward to part 2.
Yeah, I'd love to have another conversation. This is great. I love to chew on this stuff and think about it. And
I wish I could sit in your class.
yeah, well, I always try to. I've said this numerous times. It's like I try to create a classroom environment as something that I'd want to show up to. If I be bored with my class, then I'm not doing it right.
Yep, great.
So
That's great.
yeah.
All right.
No, thank you. It's been
Talk to
really
you
fun.
later. Thanks,
All
Chris.
right.